have to pay while our leaders play. All I see, people are rip and a rob, all are bribe. Thief never love is the thief.
Good evening and welcome once again to Plain Talk. My name is Christopher Ram and I welcome you to be with us for the next hour. For those of you who have read the papers today or looked at the news today, Wednesday, March 1, you would have realized that there were some protests in Georgetown yesterday at the Ministry of Finance. The women's organization Red Thread was protesting against the value-added tax generally, and outside of the Guyana Revenue Authority, there was a protest against the VAT on education in particular. On Plain Talk this evening, we are going to talk not just on VAT and education, but rather on the role of private education in the entire education system, its contributions, maybe its strengths, its weaknesses, and why we think, if we do think, it is so important and possibly should be excluded from the value-added tax. It's my particular pleasure this evening to have a first-time guest, Ms. Rachael Henry. She's a Trinidadian by birth. She calls herself a Guyanese Trinidadian now, possibly because of marriage. She's a member of the PTA of Giselle's Education Institute, which is a private organization. And on my extreme left, Ms. DeNoota Radzik, who is not a stranger to our program. She's a parent and NGO activist in several organizations. So, Rachel, let me extend a very special welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Ram.
DeNoota?
Thanks, Chris.
Education. How would you assess the state of our education?
Well, I think it could be much better than it is. But I do think that when the Constitution was changed, when there was amendments to the Constitution which allowed for private education to happen in Guyana, I think it made a difference to many people. I think at that time, and I think for some time, the public education has been struggling in terms of meeting the needs and requirements of students in Guyana. So I think it shifted. It was a shift which I think was positive to Guyana. I think it also removed some of the burden from the public education system, right? Because as we know now, there are 52 private educational institutions operating in Guyana in a very short space of time. So obviously there was a need for it, and parents sent their children to school, opted to send their children, some of their children, or some parents opted to send children to private education because obviously they felt that the public education system was really not doing the job for them and for their children.
You know, DeNoota, I think lots of people probably don't realize there was a time when you could not have had private education. Education had in fact been nationalized. I think this was in the 70s, and it remained that way for several years. So, Ms. Henry, your take on you've got two children at school. Your take on the state of education, and perhaps as you offer your response, maybe you can comment on a comparison with your own home country, Trinidad.
Well, I think one of the things that I've looked at, and I've been in Guyana for, let's say, 3+ years, and in coming in and observing the system, one, I think that the educational system in Guyana is quite good. the private education system. My friends from Guyana would have, made their own comments in terms of private schools that are available, but there was never conversations that I held with friends concerning the public school system. So I knew coming into Guyana that I had to look actually at, what was being offered at the private level. In Trinidad, schooling and public schooling is still one that is quite good, where your child could attend a public school, and that public school is rated amongst, the top schools, yes. Right? For instance, at common entrance level, at sea level in Trinidad, there are public schools, students who attend public schools all their lives that perform pretty well. One of the things I had to look at, therefore, in coming into Guyana is then what would be the decision that I would make. And one of the things I've looked at just scouting on the internet, common entrance, grade 6 classes, you find that the private schools, just from my basic observation, those students are at the top with respect to common entrance, classes and so forth. Education, as it is critical in any society. Education is the fiber on which, everything is booted. And so in other words, for the advancement of the country, you must look at ensuring that you have the best means set aside for your educational system.
And in your view, it has to be both in the private and certainly in the public education system.
I think in Guyana, the private system significantly augments the public system.
Is that a good thing where the education system, DeNoota, has to depend so much on the private system, which is to a large extent is profit oriented to start with? It probably creates that elitist. It creates the division between parents, wealthy parents, who can afford their kids to go to these schools and others. Or am I misrepresenting the kids who go to private schools as well? That you have quite poor children going to private schools as well.
Oh, absolutely. And we see persons talking about this, that they are not necessarily rich or well off, but they choose to make the sacrifice to send their children to a private school because they feel it will give them a better chance at performing at school and also after school, going on to further education or getting a good job. So and the fact that there are 52 private schools operating in Guyana, as I said before, within a short period of time.
And we're not talking about the kindergarten, very small. We're talking about serious private schools.
That there really is a need. There was a need for it, and people took the opportunities. I mean, I think that especially when we look at the national grade 6 examination results, what we've been seeing for a number of years is that the students at private institutions are actually outperforming those students at the public schools. And so a lot of parents actually do make the sacrifice, because what happens when, after after the grade 6 examination is, depending on the grade you get, right, you will be assigned to a A, B, C, or a D school. Mm-hmm. And, with the A being like the highest standard, etc. So many parents feel if they sacrifice to send their children to a private primary school, at the end of the primary cycle, your children have a better chance of maybe getting into maybe a public school, but one of the better public schools. So I think what you have is that some parents might opt to send their children to primary private, and then send them to the public secondary schools, especially if they can get into one of the better ones by having gone to private primary education. And a lot of the schools, so the other thing is a lot of schools are centered in communities,
Yes.
right? So, and I mean, I know of many persons, I know of many domestics who actually sacrificed to send their children to private school at the primary level.
What's your experience in Giselle's education
Well,
institute?
and
The spectrum of your students.
Well, basically from our PTA meetings, I remember the topic actually came up on the discussion, and many of the parents expressed disgust. The question was asked outrightly, and the principal was really placed in a hot seat in terms of what is it that school fees would increase this term, and the principal being on the spot, then therefore had to say, she had to be very candid, and her response was that there are a lot of parents who sacrifice daily to ensure that their children could come to school. It's not that you have, I believe that, there are persons from middle class and upper class whose children go to DeNoota schools. But then I also think that there are many parents, as DeNoota said, there are many parents who are making a daily sacrifice for their children to have a better education. And because they realize, listen, I need to do that early to ensure that, possibly they're able to get into a good secondary school, and that, as a family, our living, could be better.
So what you're suggesting here, Rachael, is that this perception that the kids who go to private schools come from wealthy families, that's a misrepresentation.
Well, I would love to class myself as wealthy, but I haven't gotten to that place as yet. And my children attend a private school, and we have, since my husband and I do business in Guyana. As I said, I would love to class myself as wealthy, but the records would show I'm not there as yet. But I want my children to have a good education.
And
This perception of wealthy kids, wealthy people.
I'll just share this. I actually know of some students who were actually going to a private school, and this was a private secondary school. And when they looked at the kind of results that the children were having, they opted actually to remove them and put them into the public school. So, and I just want to make this point, is that, the responsibility of the Ministry of Education is also to should be supervising the private schools, because maybe some of them, right, are really not up to par. And, they need some monitoring of that. And I think that is also very important to do, because I know this was an actual experience. It was a recent experience. And it was obvious. I'm not sure what was happening at that particular school, but the students were really not benefiting from being there. And hopefully they will do better once they get into, once they go to the public school. So yes, many of the private institutions are good, but there might be a few who really need to improve their standards, and so I think that is also another feature that we have to take into account. But really, why would the state want to increase fairly dramatically, right, if they impose this 14% VAT on education? Why would they want to increase fairly dramatically a large influx of new students into the public education system? Because A lot of public education schools in the public education system is struggling. It's struggling, and
Struggling on what score?
they're
Facilities,
struggling.
teachers.
Facilities, teachers, infrastructure of schools, and in my organization, we work in a number of schools and so on. And
Which organization is this?
this is Help and Shelter.
Yeah, you work in so many organizations.
Well, not really, but Help and Shelter. And one of the things that actually happens is that some children don't go to school for a full 5-day week. They go to school 3 days a week because their parents cannot afford to pay transportation costs, to give them money for lunch and so on, food at school. Sometimes they're also unable to buy the extra books to fund the assignments that the children have to do, so that even in the free public education system in Guyana, there are a number of parents who are finding it very difficult to send their children even to the public, because they still have a cost. It's free education, but there's still a cost to that.
That reminds me of a couple of days ago, someone came to my office and was pleading with me, can I help? Because he lives in the Mahaica River, has 2 daughters. One goes to school east of the Mahaica River, one goes west, and could not afford to send both of them to school on the same day. And I must say, I wouldn't say who it was, but I spoke to a very understanding person from the Ministry of Education, and I'm glad to see that young lady. She was only 12 years old, and she had stayed away from school for the better part of an entire term. Now, what would have been her future? It almost would have been guaranteed very bleak if she didn't get to go back to school. You raised an interesting point. Yes, the private schools turn out, when you look at the top, whatever types of exams, the private schools. But it seems to be limited to even a handful of private schools as well. It appears that the quality is not evenly distributed through the entire private school system.
Well, again, based on my observation, yes, it seems to be basically just a handful of schools that you see, topping the common entrance annual exam. But I can't say what would be the reason, for that. But as my friend here mentioned, one of the things that I think the government needs to probably look at is having private assistive schools. I read in an article in the Starbrook News sometime concerning the fact that there are 54 private schools. And the statement that the minister mentioned is that this VAT is being placed on private education, on private schools, yes, but he mentioned that the public schools have not been, treating with their annual taxes and so forth.
The private schools?
The private schools.
Yes.
And I felt to myself then maybe that is something that they had to look into as a
separate issue.
As a separate issue. And maybe if it is, they were stringent in that area, right? Then the imposition of the VAT, which obviously affects the parents, right, would not be something that they would have delved into. In other words, treat with what is before you, regulate that. And even if the government has to go into the private school systems and have them private assisted, so that you're sure that they're all on the same page as far as
because when they come out, they're part of that Guyanese workforce.
Anyhow you take it, So maybe that is actually a route that the government could have looked into in terms of treating it with that on that side, because it's not equitable when you look at what's happening with income tax and VAT, right? If if income tax was reduced by 2% and VAT is 14% on a service that I was not paying VAT on before, there is no equity there. In fact, I'm at a loss.
How does, in terms of value-added tax, because you do have value-added tax in Trinidad,
Yes.
how does the Trinidad VAT system deal with private education?
Well,
Is VAT imposed on fees paid by the private education?
I'm not an authority. I can't say. I know that VAT was recently reduced on certain items. It's now at 12.5%. The education is not an issue in Trinidad because of the fact that there are a lot of subsidies, such as GATE. I mean, GATE was recently debarred.
And what's GATE?
GATE was a government program that actually was subsidizing a significant portion of school fees, both for for tertiary level, and so it helped students and especially those who came from poorer areas in Trinidad to be able to access education. Education is critical, whether we're thinking about it from private or public or from who can afford it, is critical for your society moving forward. And so I think maybe even if the government had to widen its base of consultants, it was critical that they did that to ensure that they looked at the effects of the VAT on the private educational system.
I was hoping, I wanted to, as I said, I wanted to discuss the general education system first, but you brought us into this area. The suggestion by the Minister of Finance that, and I think the same thing had been said about health, that if you could afford to go to a private hospital, you can afford to pay VAT. Is that sufficiently sensitive to the realities of people's lives and their health and their money, that in fact, because you send a child to a private school, you can afford to immediately pay 40% more?
I don't think so, and I think those comments were very insensitive of the Minister of Finance. If you go to any private hospital in Guyana, you see a lot of people there. And a lot of people, once again, they are sacrificing in order to receive some kind of medical help from a private health institution, because once again they feel, right, or they have had experiences where the public health system has failed them or failed their relatives, their loved ones, their children. And we know this. The Guyana Public Hospital is, overwhelmed by the number of persons who go there. And with that overwhelming, etc., sometimes, people don't get quick attention. We've heard of times where people have passed away, actually died waiting at the accident and emergency section.
Despite the triage system they have.
Yes, in order to receive treatment. And so it's these kind of experiences and so on that, push persons to make the sacrifices to use the private health system, for improved health services. I don't think it means that everybody who's using it is rich or thing, but in some cases what happens is that, families abroad maybe send some money because a person needs to get an operation or needs to get some kind of health intervention, and so, their income, right, is,
artificially
they get a
increased,
gift then, a
yes.
gift of some funds and so on in order to allow this to happen. But the thing is that, you need both in a society. You need both public and you need private. institutions, be they health or education, because it relieves some of the burden on the public health system. It's very expensive, I think, when we look at budget and so on, and Chris, you're a money man, an accounts guy, and so on.
Well, just accountant, not that I have money.
But a large percentage of the national budget goes to both first to education, higher, and then to health.
Yes.
And even with all of that, the public schools are still struggling. Many of them are struggling. I wouldn't, I mean, because sometimes, you know, we forget that not all schools are in urban areas, but in the rural areas, right? Many of those schools lack a lot of basic infrastructure and so on. You know, there are schools where they don't have separate classrooms, it's one big long room,
Yes.
and it's divided up, you know, so there's a lot of noise, etc. There are schools where, you know, the sanitary facilities do not work properly, right? There are schools that don't have any computers, you know, don't have IT. And even if IT is taught, it's taught, the theory of IT is taught because the children do not have computers in that school.
No
Classrooms
no
are
electricity backup.
large. And classrooms sometimes are large. And the further you get away from the urban centers, the more teachers in the public schools, you get less trained teachers. And remember, we have the whole hinterland
Yes.
thing coming. So, I mean, why would the Minister of Education want to tax private schools, which are,
You said the Minister of Education, is that what you meant?
well, the VAT.
Yes. No, but you said the Minister of Education
Sorry,
wants
Minister of Finance. Minister of Finance. Sorry. Minister of Finance. Yeah. Why tax something that is working well? But if something is going fairly well, leave it. I mean, and to suggest that those who are wealthier by this tax, by taxing the wealthy people who can afford to pay public education, can afford to so-called even pay more, to tax them as a way of, I'm not sure, then taking the excess of that tax to putting it towards public education. I don't quite understand what is the purpose of it, right? Because I think the other thing that happens is that, and we see it every day, is that state finances very often are not utilized efficiently and appropriately. So there's still corruption in the system. There's still a lot of wastage. I think there's still things where even the money that's available is going to the wrong sort of programs, and therefore the whole public education system is not benefiting. So I think that's so that even if the idea, the rationale was that you would get then a certain amount of money from taxing the private education system, and that then would go to improvements. My experience of the state and its allocation of resources and how efficiently this is done, I really do not think that it will make a difference. And what you will do is you would just throw parents, a lot of children, and institutions into chaos. And I don't think we need that at this moment.
Rachel, you were saying that you had the Giselle's Education Institute had this very passionate discussion. What impact is the consensus that this VAT would have on enrollment when it in fact does kick in? because I think it came in the 1st of February, maybe fees had been paid by then, so
Right.
the immediate impact was not felt. What is the thinking as to what impact this will have?
I think the general consensus is that some parents may have to rethink private schooling. So it means that some children may actually have to revert to the public school system. And from a social standpoint, I think one of the things that would definitely impact would be where you have, a number of siblings in a home, and a parent is now placed in a situation where they have to choose, right? Who am I going to send to private school? And that puts any parent in a seat that they don't want to be in. You're talking about favoritism that could impact a child to the point where, you have negative aspects displaying itself throughout their adult life because my parent didn't think it fit that I should have the best education. So you have things like that that would eventually happen because parents have to make decisions. There's only so much money you now have in the kitty.
You can only squeeze so much out of it.
Exactly, right? So I think many parents at our PTA, express that they really cannot afford an increase in school fees, and as a result of that, they would have to rethink what's happening, from the next term.
So
It means an upheaval if that transition actually kicks in.
You're saying your PT has actually discussed.
We've
with the
discussed
parents.
it. We've discussed it. Yes, and as I told you, the principal was put on the spot. So that there was not an outright decision. But as at the moment, I think everything in the country is basically it's like it's up in grabs. What's going to happen? Because eventually, even if the principal says, "Listen, you don't have to pay it for this the new term that's coming," right? What's going to happen down the road?
Yeah, you always live with that fear. Then Rachel makes this point that if you've got 3 children, you probably, even if you squeeze as much as you might, you can only all 3 in private education. You can't continue that. That's an awful decision.
Yes, it would be, and I guess the
And for the
choice-
siblings as well.
Yeah.
exactly for them also, and they probably look and say, okay, well, maybe either the brightest goes or the least bright goes, but it is a very it's a terrible situation for parents to be placed in. But Chris, the other thing that we see very clearly about this VAT, the 14% VAT on private educational services, is that it is unpopular. When the students from School of the Nations decided to start a petition, 14,000 signatures in the space of a very short time, I think demonstrates, how unpopular such a decision is, and that people feel that it is really a bad decision, that it's not going to be helpful for anyone, really, and that it really needs to be reversed. They just really need to reverse it, because, I don't know, as I say, I'm not really a accountant or know too much, but I think the little that I'm grasping.
Women who have to manage the domestic
Right,
budget
we're very good
are
at
as
that.
good
Yes.
as any accountant, I can promise you that.
But it seems to me that VAT is an easy way to get money out of the system, more than, say, the GRA trying to find out if everybody is paying their tax, if there's an educational institution or whatever. I don't know, because when the Minister of Finance also says, well, so many of these private institutions and so on are not paying what they should be paying, right, even though some are, well, why don't you then change it? I mean, if there are loopholes, plug the loopholes and allow those institutions, yes, to pay, you know, something that is reasonable. And with that, you will also, you know, increase your inflow, you know, to redistribute it as you wish. But it seems to me it doesn't make sense, because I'm not sure. I mean, maybe you will get more if you impose that, but at the expense of what? At the expense of what? Public education.
Shutting out opportunities to somebody.
Yes, you are. You know, you're really going to be disrupting children's lives, because if you have to change schools, that is always very difficult. The children then have to leave where they have their friends. You know, they're part of a group. They have their school. They feel committed to their school. It's going to be very disruptive to go into a whole new environment, right? And sometimes children do not transition well, and especially if, like, I think what I heard with some, they are like in fourth form or fifth form, or you know, the grade 6 examination and that kind of thing, to have to move when you're at a point where you're about to sit an important examination, which is going to determine, you know, your future to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's putting a huge amount of pressure on those students, which I just don't think it's
Which
fair.
I don't think we as adults, now that you put it that way, DeNoota, that's an amazing
yes.
amount of psychological
Absolutely,
pressure.
it is.
As a matter of fact, it could create serious long-term effect. What Rachael, you said you all had this serious meeting. What kind of options? Because yes, if you're confronted with it, then you have to move from one school. Hopefully, as DeNoota said, it wouldn't be as seamlessly as we think it might. How do you get into that school and get this new type of arrangement where you reach that comfort zone that you can now really study? Have parents even thought, what is the next step? I take my child out of school, of this primary school, because I cannot afford this private school. What do I do?
Exactly.
Has there been the discussion with the Ministry of Education?
Exactly. You have to get enrollment.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Which is not easy.
No, because you might have a big classroom. It's
A lot of-
chaotic. It's just chaos.
It's really
Chaotic.
it's fiscal policy, yes, but it's creating it's a negative social impact they're going to have on society. You have disgruntled parents, right, and you're going to have children that are maladjusted, right, because, you know, children are different. They learn different,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result of that, you're impacting their world to the point where they now have to go in change mode.
Mm-hmm.
For any child, that's a big adjustment. So it's going to create a negative social impact on society, and you know, as we discuss, you know, what is the gain there?
Is it worth it to the society as a whole?
Right. I mean, is the revenue that's going to come from this, right? Is it going to benefit schooling, the educational system? You know, does one outweigh the other?
Yeah, and again, DeNoota, you really got me troubled a little bit. Here it is, these kids, accustomed to private school, suddenly have to go into a public school, and the peers in the public schools start sniggering. Look, they went to private school, and now they had to come here, and all kinds of the kind of schoolyard type of conversation that takes place.
Yeah, maybe, but you know, children are also kind of open. I think sometimes they're more open and you know, to differences sometimes than adults are, and that's why I think that, you know, creating this thing of pitting one type of, you know, public education against a private education is not something that we need in Guyana at all at this moment. What we should be doing is really pooling our resources together. Therefore, what you want is the private education institutions and the public education institutions, in fact, working closer together to improve the
And playing on
standards
each
of
other's strengths.
education
Yeah.
for all. And that means everybody benefits. Everybody benefits. But, this is not, and even in the public education system, there is, I don't know if you would call it discrimination, but depending where you live, if you live in the hinterland region, chances are your child is not going to get maybe as good an education because there are a lot less resources and teachers, etc., than if the child is going to Queen's College, say in
Right.
Georgetown.
So even if
So,
it's the formal type
with-
of education,
Yeah,
or more practical and vocational type.
and within that, and and there are many parents also who can afford to send their children to private education, but they would prefer them to go to one of the top secondary schools in Guyana because the results from CSEC from those schools are still extremely good.
Yes.
Whereas if you're in
But again,
in a
that's a
rural,
minority.
urban, rural,
Yes.
community, you might not get those opportunities. So there are differences, depending on location, where you live, etc. So even within the public education system, it's not all the time a level playing field. It really isn't. And there are some communities in which the people who live there don't want their children to go to the public school in that community. They would prefer them to go to another public school in another community.
Rachel, you come from the Twin Island of Trinidad and Tobago. You've got a larger population, much larger than Guyana. You have a much greater concentration.
Yeah.
So what DeNoota is talking about has some peculiarities direct to Guyana. You don't have the kind of the hinterland communities. You don't have that.
Yes.
How does Trinidad try to address that issue of wealthier areas that are better endowed, as opposed to the less fortunate areas in terms of the education system and opportunities?
I think over the years, one of the things that Trinidad and Tobago did is that they invested in the infrastructure. They invested in the education of the youth of Trinidad and Tobago. And that investment, whilst Trinidad have their ills, and we all know about it, they have made significant inroads in terms of public schooling and also many different amenities for schools, not with, in some depressed areas as well as in the populated areas, right? There are youth centers in depressed areas specifically to assist the children in those areas so that they have extracurricular, right? Persons that would go into centers and do life skills training. A lot of investment was made in the infrastructure of the educational system to ensure that there was some. And as a result of that, I remember when I was at university, around that time was when they looked at increasing the salaries of teachers and bringing it on par with persons working in other institutions, so that someone from university at that point in time felt that, listen, it's an excellent opportunity for me to be a teacher because this salary was equitable with if I went to a large corporation in Trinidad. And because of that, now you found that you had that new breed going into the public school system, right? And you had a good level of education, whether you sent your school to private or public. You had that, good management of resources there.
I was just going to ask you that question, Tracy, of how the government has addressed this question of teacher salaries, because we have a serious problem with teacher salaries. In fact, lots of police, nurses, etc. your perception of the
Yes.
problems as far as salaries are.
Exactly. I mean, you really have to, we really need to respect and admire our teachers. I mean, they are so important for the advancement of the entire country, right? Because education, that is how you improve your status in society and so on. Generally, that's considered, and it is so. So, a lot of parents, of course, that's, in terms of, it's not only rich people who are going to be affected by this, because parents understand that they want to invest in the education of their children, because it should pay off as they move forward. But coming back to teachers, yes, I mean, I really do not think the salaries are good enough. I mean, I think the Ghana Teachers Union, they've been trying to negotiate. They say what they think is a livable wage for them. I don't think that the government has actually addressed that as yet, even though they're looking at benefits. I think there are negotiations now with the Teachers Union on some other benefits, etc.
Well, you still need a good cash salary.
Yes, you absolutely need that. And you have to ensure also that you invest in your teachers also, so that you train them adequately, that they can continue to advance in terms of their knowledge and new techniques and whatever, so that, they just don't get stuck at a certain level, but, they have ongoing education available to them. I think that the conditions under which they teach are also, it's another very important aspect, because there's really some of them, facilities for teachers, some of them don't even really have proper staff room and washroom facilities, and sometimes, all kinds of things. Sometimes they don't have enough material. Some of them put their own money into buying materials to help their students and so on. So there are a lot of challenges that teachers face, and besides all of that, then they also have their students in the classroom that they have to address and teach, and they come from all kinds of backgrounds. And sometimes the school system, there's not enough support for children who have problems and issues in school, right? It's not because the teacher is it's very hard to require a teacher also to be a social worker
yes.
in the classroom. That is not what they need to be. And the other thing
You should have social workers
you should have
on location all
adequate
day.
social workers, because a lot of students in Ghana have a lot of problems. We have families that are really struggling, that are at risk and are vulnerable, and that continues.
Many single-parent families.
Single parent families and so on. And the other thing that happens is this, Chris, that you see in the system, public education system, and maybe in the private, I'm not sure, but you would have children who have disabilities. But there is not a system I'm not sure if it's available in some schools in Ghana, but in other schools, a system where they are tested, where, whatever disability they have is identified, and there's some program that will address that. Very often they're left in the classroom.
Treated as though they were a normal person.
No, and yes, they get sent right up through the system. They come out of school and they cannot read and write. They cannot read and write.
Rachel, let me ask you, how does the primary school, how does your private school deal with a situation where you've got special needs children, for example?
To be honest, I can't say with respect to Jocel's. I know that I observed there were some children at School of the Nations with special needs that they dealt with differently.
Your kids went to...
They spent some time
at
School of
Nations,
the Nations, yes, and that was something that I observed. I can't say if there is a system in place with respect to students with special needs, but of course what needs to happen is that there must be an assessment that takes place early, so that it can be identified. But I don't know what happens when it is identified.
You raised a point just now about these facilities. I teach at the University of Guyana. We don't even have a staff room. So you go and you go to your class and you walk out. Is it just that somebody's not thinking that you have to start? It becomes from the conception stage. What facilities do I need to have in an environment, in a community, because it is a community.
Yeah, and that is why I really think that, instead of this whole, idea of VAT and imposing VAT and so on, I mean, the private and the public think they really need to work together, because I think there could be benefits for both of them in a situation like that. So, say with the University of Guyana, and the other thing that is really important for, I know you talk about the university, but I'm going back to schools, is to get the community involved in schooling. You have resources in that community, right? Are you calling on those resources? You even have your parents. Okay, some of them might not come to parent-teacher meetings, because even in private schools, I can tell you, a lot of parents don't turn up for parent-teacher meetings. And sometimes I've seen more parents turning up for parent-teacher meetings in public schools than in private schools. But also utilize your parents. I mean, they are resources, and we need to utilize them. Listen, give people the opportunity, to assist, to be involved in it. And I think you get better schools. I think you get better communities. And even with the University of Guyana, I don't know how much people reach out to maybe private sector. I mean, I know that they've been doing trying to get some other resources, but I think that is what you need to do. And you also need a staff, right, who's happy and satisfied. If you have teachers who are dissatisfied, they're not going to give 100%.
You have a classroom of sub-performing.
Exactly, yeah.
One of the things we haven't talked, and DeNoota, this has a special meaning for you and me. What role should the Minister of Education be playing in this question of VAT and education? Shouldn't we be hearing from the Minister of Education?
Yes, I think everybody should be speaking out on.
But the Minister of
this.
Education in particular, isn't it?
Yes, and because we know, I mean, there are many ministers whose children go to private schools. They're not utilizing the public education system. They're utilizing the private. So they have that option. So obviously, even for them, they chose another thing. But I really am finding, even though I know that there's some changes, and we hear there's, I think, a commission set up to look into the whole education system and so on, but our education system in Guyana, especially the public education system, it really needs to be revamped. This because it is failing a lot of students. We have a lot of dropouts taking place in Guyana at school level, and it's a lot of boys. A lot of boys are dropping out of school. And they drop out of schools, because at some point they are the system.
There's a
schooling
disconnect
is not
between them.
making
There's a
sense
disconnect,
to them.
yes, between them
And the parents saying, you wasting time, you coming home and you getting low marks, best you come out to school and find a little job and bring something into the house.
Rachael, as you come from a sister Caribbean country, what would you say to us about our education system, without being presumptuous? We would accept your criticism, believe me.
Well, definitely, as I said, I really believe that the government needs to go back. If it means widening their consultant base, or if it means just bringing in new thinkers. And I think that all that they need in terms of advice is available right here in Guyana. I just think that if it is, they would just open the floor to have meaningful, truthful discussion about what's happening and the impact of things. I mean, we see just recently with the issue of the parking meter, right? Was it really thought through? And it's the same thing that's happening with this issue. right?
That's the VAT on education.
That's the VAT on
Private
education.
education,
It's the same thing that's happening. So basically, I think everything that the government of Guyana needs, right, to rectify the situation and to go forward is available right here. But it involves coming together, looking at the situation for what it is, being able to place all the negatives and all the positives on the table and see how we go forward. I mean, I personally believe you don't break something that's good.
Exactly.
And if the private system augments there are so many students in the public school system that depend on private lessons to take them further. Right?
Even if so they're in
They
the public
can-
system, but they depend on
need-
private.
Yeah, so that they could, they both can work together. And in most societies that we term as good operating societies, they work together.
All right, well, what do we do? What do we say to the government? What call do we make about this value-added tax on private education?
They have to.
And
remove
let me
it.
just make this point. It is not only on private education. The law, as it's written, the University of Guyana, the fees they charge are also subject to VAT. But I just
But they
wanted
said
to...
no.
They're wrong. They are wrong. Anyway, let's talk about the private schools. What would you say to the government?
I would say that they really need to remove it. It's just an imposition. I do not think they had consultations in Guyana about this. Have you heard of any? I haven't heard of any. This is a big change. It's a big change, and it's a burdensome tax. And it seems as if, gosh, man, every day it's some new tax people are being faced with. Guyanese are overtaxed. We are overtaxed, and are we getting benefits from this, from all of this taxation? Are we seeing the benefits of it? I think it has to go. I do not think it will work. I think it will really be negative, very negative in the society.
Rachael, you have 45 seconds. The floor is yours.
I would say that the tax has to be removed. If it means calling a public consultation, get all the stakeholders together, get everyone together. But at the end of it, I believe that the VAT has to be removed to allow society to progress. There are other taxes that are in place already that are burdensome on the population, and there is no equity with respect to revenue and expenditure. So there is no way, no other means that people could pull into their pockets and get this VAT. The government therefore has to take steps to remove it with immediate effect.
Rachael Henry, member of the PTA of Giselle's Education Institute, Trinidadian, but living in Guyana. Ms. DeNoota Radzik, parent, NGO activist, social commentator, everything. Thank you very much for appearing on Play Talk. It's been very useful chatting with you. I want to say thank you to the operators. You've got some new operators. I wish they would show their faces on the television sometimes. I want to thank you, the viewers, and I look forward again to next week to talk with you once again. So have a good night, have a good week.